Hello, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer, the board game review show that was originally scheduled to play the Penguin in Todd Phillips' Joker.
Ah, Joker, I see the state has cut your funding for your medication. That's too bad. That's too bad. Umbrella?
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Crusader Kings from Free League. Crusader Kings from Free League is loosely based upon the video game of the same name and Crusader Kings 2, and in it, 1 to 5 players are going to take on the roles of the various dynastic houses ruling medieval kingdoms in Europe. Players can take on the role of the ruling dynasties of England, France, Spain, the Italian states, or the German states. Now, depending on the scenario, and I believe there's 6 scenarios in this book, depending on the scenario, you're going to be a different king at a different time, and you're going to have different certain starting conditions and different territories you control. Now, the game board is a map of Europe that contains these 5 regions of Western Europe, and you're also going to have space for various action cards, as well as a Crusader track that's going to keep track of you going on those kooky crusades. The game will take place over the course of 3 eras. Now, at the beginning of each era, you draw which cards you will want for that era. Now, each round, you're going to take 2 actions, play 2 cards for actions. So during this phase where you draw cards, you're actually going to draw a total of 8 cards, unless you have modifiers that let you draw more. But what you're going to do is look at the various kinds of actions that are available, and you're going to draw cards from those piles in whatever quantities you want, but you must draw at least 1 Crusader card. Now, I say you can draw whatever quantities you want. In fact, you are limited. You have to draw between 0 and a certain number of other cards. You can't just draw all from 1. Now, the kinds of cards you can draw are like development cards, which allow you to build castles or buy certain special development cards. You can get taxing cards, which allow you, of course, to tax your population to get money, which you will need in the game. You can use the kind of mobilize war cards, which allow you to create soldiers and move them around the board. You have kind of plot and intrigue cards, which allow you to play dirty tricks on the other players in the game. You're also going to draw crusade cards per era, but you can only go on 1 crusade, but you could draw more cards to get a card that is to choose a card that is more beneficial to you from your hand. Now, during the round phase, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put out members of your family. That's right, each dynasty has little kind of family cards, character cards, culture cards. And what you're going to do is you're going to take these various family members, male and female, and you're going to place them in parts of Europe that are your color but are unoccupied. You're going to place these cards around. Now, what you're going to do is you're each going to take an opportunity to try to marry one of your members of your family off to one of these different cards on the board. You could also negotiate a marriage between somebody else who has a family member on their player mat, or you can go ahead and try to marry someone who is on the board. If you succeed, you can go ahead and place a pact there. You now have a pact with that specific territory, which is going to lead to good things for you later in the game. Next, you're going to go ahead and you're going to plot, meaning you're going to decide which cards you want to use. You're going to look at your hand of cards, you're going to pick 2 cards and place them face down. The order is important because that's the order in which you're going to play the cards during your turn. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 turns. You're going to each take 1 turn, then you're each going to take a second turn. Now, how the turns work is, first of all, you play the card. And the card lets you, as I say, take those different actions. You can, build a castle with the build develop card, or you can draw one of the development cards. There are different development cards. You have to pay a price or 3 face up. And these will let you do different things, like you could build a navy, or you could, build a longbowman, which helps you in attack, or plate armor, which helps you in defense. Or you can get counselors, and these are special characters that also give you certain advantages in certain situations. But if you play, for instance, the war card, the mobilize card, you can essentially create an army, and this is going to be useful. You may have uprising tokens. They can put down uprisings, because you're not going to get taxes from regions that are uprising. Or you can use them to invade other players. You're going to have the tax cards, and the tax cards are very important, because again, you're going to be able to gain money. You're going to gain money for every territory you control, which is symbolized by the horse figure, whereas your armies are symbolized by infantry. And you are going to go ahead and get tax from all those areas, plus I think another tax for a castle you've got. And there may be other little things that allow you to get tax bonuses as well. You can plot against your enemies using the plot, intrigue, overthrow cards. You can plot against them. You can plot to manufacture a casus belli, a reason to go to war with them. You're going to kind of keep track of that on your player board, whether you're at war with somebody or whether you have peaceful relations, a pact, or whether you are prepared to go to war for them with a casus belli. But you can also attempt to assassinate another character. You can attempt to create unrest in another player's region or overthrow that region. So there's all sorts of kind of devious things you can do with those kinds of cards as well. Now you're going to send a male member of your family to the Holy Land with a crusade action in the hopes of getting him eventually to Jerusalem, or at least if you keep going, maybe you can be the one to get to Jerusalem, which will give you a powerful victory point at the end of the game. Now, throughout all of these actions, most of them require that you pass what is essentially a skill check. Now, how skill checks work in this game, and you have to do this when you're attempting to marry somebody or people with good traits as well, is every character has traits. Now, you have your character board where you have a place for your king, his wife, his siblings, and his children. And every character, when they come out, is going to get a trait. These are little tokens, and these can be good traits, which are green, or negative traits, which are red. And these can be things like, they can be greedy, or lustful, or slothful, or they could be, beautiful, or brave, or ambitious. There's all these different kinds of traits that these different characters have. They're usually good or bad, although some of them can, in certain circumstances, can work in the opposite ways. Now, you're going to have a number of these skill traits already in your bag, and for instance, when you go to the Holy Land, you'll get a skill trait. If you pass a crusade check, you'll get a skill trait. When you marry somebody, bring them into the family, those skill traits are going to be added to the family. Whenever somebody becomes king, any traits on their card actually go in your bag. So, ideally, you want to pick people with good green skill traits, because the more green you have in your bag, the more likely you are to achieve success. Because a skill check is essentially reaching into your bag and pulling out a token. If it's green, all things being equal, you succeed. If it's red, you fail. As I say, in certain circumstances, that can be swapped. But you can also pay for more chances, and your opponents can take turns to kind of pay money to negate your chances down to the level of absolute necessity for success. Now, also, there's a second part to any of your actions. When you play a card, after you take the action you want to take, there is some kind of an event that is triggered. Now, usually that event's going to affect the next person or yourself, but oftentimes it will be things like the next person in line, they gain a child, or maybe you have a bad tax revenue because there's a plague or something like that. So there are different events that are triggered. So somebody plays whenever they play a card, that's going to trigger some kind of event that may affect you. Now, at the end of your turn, you're going to go ahead, you've got to do upkeep, you've got to pay a gold for every soldier you have on the board. It's an infantry. If you can't pay for it, you demobilize him. You also have to add a time toker to your king. Once your king gets so many time tokers, I think like 5, then he essentially dies and you have to get a new king. So you keep doing this, and at the time you're going to be able to gain certain powerful kind of victory point tokens. Like we're going to say, if you're the first person to take Jerusalem in the Crusades, which will happen in the later part of the game, you will gain the Jerusalem token. But there's several other tokens like that will count toward victory points at the end of the game. Now critically, as I say, you are fighting, but you're also creating pacts with certain areas. You're going to have pacts with other players. You're attempting to defend your own land while playing dirty tricks and mobilizing against these enemies as well. Now, the game ends after you've completed the 3 eras. After you've played through all 3 eras, again, that's 3 rounds per era, so essentially 9 rounds of the game. Once that's done, you're going to go ahead and look at scoring. You're essentially going to gain victory points for every territory that you control, meaning you have one of the mounted knights, soldiers, minis in that area. You're going to gain a token you're going to gain a victory point, rather, for that area. But as I say, you'll also gain victory points for these various tokens that you have accumulated as well. After you've added up all of these achievement tokens that you've got and all of the territories that you've got, whoever has the most victory points wins Crusader Kings. So Crusader Kings was a game that was not even really on my radar. It was a game that a friend of mine, Matthias, he had backed on Kickstarter, and he was telling me about it. He was really excited for it. So I was really interested in it, and I was able to actually, the good people at Free League sent me a copy, and I was able to play. I played it a couple times now, and it is, well, first of all, it's dudes on a map in Europe, which right there sells me. I love a good map of Europe in a game, and I love that whole. I don't know. I just get giddy. I like that. It goes back to, I guess, my Castle Risk days, right? I love that map, and I love that idea. So I was interested right off the bat, and I was further interested in this idea of kind of the dynastic part of the game, where you've got these dynasties that you're manipulating throughout the game. Now, I will tell you, in my rules description, that was just a brief overview, right? There is a ton going on in this game. There is a ton. This is a game that is packed with small rules and exceptions. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of that. And I have to say here, I think the rulebook could have been organized a little bit better, a better kind of index. I think it could have been better presented. And I think they have subsequently done some errata and clarified some things, because there are some things here that are vague. There is some of that here. Be aware of that. But the basic gameplay is straightforward enough. The basic gameplay is straightforward enough that you can still play through it, and if you get stuck in a place, usually you can come up with a decent house rule. And then, as I say, there have been some errata and stuff published. I haven't actually looked at that. I've just gone off the base game, but I've heard about the other things they've published. So hopefully that clarifies a lot of it. And next time I play it, I'll check all that stuff out. What do I think of the gameplay itself here? Like I say, I was very intrigued with the dynastic part of this game. It reminds me, in some ways, of a game that the Academy Games did years ago, FIF 1429, which was actually a game developed, I think, in the 80s, and then they republished it here about 6 or 7 years ago. Because it had that same kind of dynastic idea of, we've got sons and daughters, we need to marry them off. That was very similar here. It feels like it's a little more streamlined in this game than it was in that game. But I like that. I like that idea of characters in games. I almost wish, I would really like to see like a good World War II, almost kind of an Axis and Allies type game, but where you have specific generals you can assign to units, and they give certain advantages to the units. I would just like that a lot. But here, it works well, and I like the trait system. I like how the traits come out, and you don't want to marry those people with bad traits, because you know there's a good chance that's going to be in your bag at some point, meaning that's negative chances for things you want to accomplish, and you want to try to get as many green traits as you can, all things being equal. So that's a very interesting dynamic, and I really like that. And I like the trait checks. I think, I'm a big fan of dice. I like to roll dice. But here, I like this system, because to me it feels like rolling dice. It's like, what's going to happen, and oh yeah, I like that, and I like how you can mitigate that by purchasing more chances to draw from the bag, and how your enemies can spend money, and that's a difficult choice because money's tough. It costs an action. You only got 9 actions in the game or thereabouts, 18 I guess. You've only got a limited number of actions in the game, and you've got to spend one of those actions in order to tax, and you're going to have to do that a few times in the game. So when you spend money, it hurts, but you have that option to spend money to pass a check you really want to pass, and you have money to try to stop someone from passing a check. And so I like that aspect of the game, because again, it's choice. It's not just chance, it's choice. There are parts of the game that I feel come up more in the games I played than in others. I didn't see a lot of the plot and overthrow cards. I didn't see a lot of assassination attempts, and that can really screw you over, particularly if you're a king and you don't have an heir and you're going to die soon. That can be scary, because if you die without an heir, there's a succession crisis, and that can set you back a little bit. And I'm not entirely sure, especially in late game, you can recover from that. But it's an interesting dynamic, and it's fun. And I love the events in this game. I love how the events come out, that they can affect you, but they can affect other players, because that's one of those things that keeps you invested in the game when it's not your turn, right? Because you're thinking, okay, what's the action? Am I going to get a son here? Am I going to get a son, but he's an idiot? Am I going to get a son, but my wife dies in childbirth? There's all these different scenarios that come up, or is my king going to die in a hunting accident, or something like that? You're always invested in this, and when you're choosing which cards you want to play, you're aware of that, because you're thinking, well, I want to play this card because I need to tax, but if I tax, it's going to help this guy, or I can go on this crusade, but if I succeed, it's going to screw me here, you know. So there's, again, these choices, and they're tough choices because you got to play these cards. You got to play the cards. That's how you do the actions. But it's tough, and I really, really like that aspect to it too. So, like I say, rulebook's a little wonky. Some of the rules are wonky. They're working on it. I'm not a fan of that. But compared to all of this goodness that this game brings to the table, I'm a fan. I've enjoyed the heck out of playing these games. Now, these are longer games, just so you're aware. You can count on, 3-4 hours, maybe even longer when you're when you're starting. These are long games. This is an afternoon. This is an evening. Be aware of that. They're long games, but they are fun. I really, really enjoy Crusader Kings. Recommendation for Crusader Kings is buy it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. And ladies and gentlemen, I actually did hear that Joaquin Phoenix is actually seriously considering doing a sequel to the Joker film. And I think that's fantastic. And I just want to say, I would make an awesome Catwoman. Okay? Yeah? Yeah?
Please somebody help me on my feet again. And I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I've been dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
Cromwell said to King, man, it's a funny thing. We don't like how you've led, so we gotta take your head. I've always been a gentleman, you see, but what must be, must be. It's a cruel necessity. The king said in reply, man, I don't wanna die. Cromwell shrugged and said, well, I'd rather you were dead. I've always been a gentleman, you see, but what must be, must be. It's a cruel necessity. Oh, we are all supermen sitting in Parliament chanting for King Charles' head. If it were up to me, you'd still be dead, you see. From you we long to be free. It's a cruel necessity.